Okay, as the MC, I'm deciding this was the professionally appropriate amount of time to let everyone log on. Uh, Thank you for joining, everyone. I'm going to share a little bit of what we're doing today and then provide a brief presentation just for the minimal amount of context. Thank you for joining. This is going to be a little recap of the trip we recently took with our Builders Lab cohort, which is the accelerator program we run for construction innovators in the US. It's going to be about 5 minutes of me presenting just to contextualize the trip and why we visited Sweden and Scotland. But we'll spend the majority of the time with the panel discussion. We have an open Q&A, so throughout any point during the presentation or the conversation, submit questions. We will have some folks, some little gremlins, filtering them in the background and feeding them to our discussant moderator for the Q&A portion, which will be the last 15 to 20 minutes of the conversation. So plenty of time to get to good questions. Without further ado, my name is Tyler Pullen. If you don't already know, I am the interim director of the Builders Lab, which is our accelerator focused on construction innovation in the US. I'm going to provide the very brief high-level things comparing US, Sweden, and Scotland, just so that the conversation's easier to follow. It's safe to say there's a lot of things that do not translate perfectly across these three countries that are very different, including many features of how housing works there. But this trip was mostly premised on the fact that there's actually a lot that does translate well across the building industry, and in particular across construction innovation things. And so the first thing that is inevitably different but similar, very different vocabulary across the three places. In the US, we value diversity, which is why we have about 10 different words and buzzwords to use. We use the same words to refer to different things and different words to refer to the same things. Variations of this include prefabricated housing, offsite construction, industrialized construction, modular housing, panelized, factory built. Choose your word carefully. Sweden and Scotland are a little bit more consistent with their vocabulary. And so Sweden tends to use industrialized construction most consistently. Scotland uses modern methods of construction, which is even more fabulously vague. In general, all of these different phrases are meant to refer to taking a lot of the practices and ideas from the manufacturing industry into the construction world, generally premised on making construction more efficient, cost-effective, in many cases sustainable. And so if you hear people using different phrases, you can generally assume the highest level umbrella to understand what they're referencing. The shape and penetration of these industrialized construction methods are, of course, different across these three places. That's a large part of the reason we chose to visit them. In the US, including HUD code or manufactured homes, which is the only federal preemptive building code that we have, we probably have 10 to 15% of annual housing starts contributed by offsite or industrialized construction. Not everyone does include manufactured homes for various reasons that we will not get into. But I think the most honest account of what penetration looks like in the US probably includes those homes. In Sweden, meanwhile, tends to be seen as one of the most advanced or furthest along in the world. About 45% of new homes are delivered with offsite or industrialized construction methods. And then in Scotland, very much so contributed by the fact that they use modern methods of construction as a phrase. Technically, they say around 84% of their annual homes, of their new homes annually, use modern methods of construction. The big caveat here is that modern methods for them also include just general productivity improvements to on-site construction, which is a bit mushy. And so big asterisk to the fact that we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples here. But safe to say there's different flavors of how offsite has adapted to each of these countries that leaves a lot to learn from. And then lastly, I think something very important to note is that materiality of construction is different across all these three places. So in the US, vast majority of all construction, and especially residential construction, uses wood, which is part of the reason stick frame is so dominant. In Sweden, wood does dominate a lot of 1 to 2 story buildings and is particularly popular for factories and companies pursuing offsite construction. But the majority of general construction, especially in the multifamily home space, is still using concrete and masonry. And that is pretty similar to the UK writ large, that concrete and masonry is more dominant. But Scotland in particular is an exception, which reveals a lot of the difference between Scotland and UK in MMC adoption as well, because Scotland uses about 80+% wood for their new housing. So I think that is an important factor just in terms of understanding what the incumbent or existing industry uses in terms of construction, but also for how that has influenced the adoption of offsite or industrialized methods. The trip itself was not just an excuse to have fun, but that was, a contributing factor. But they're on the premise that we could learn a lot from these countries and actually adapt a lot to the US. I think there's three layers that we learned from. And so we spent about a week in each country. I think the highest level view, the aerial view is what I'm calling this because I'm super creative, is looking at some of the larger scale initiatives. Most of these were regional, but some of them national. That included like innovation hubs or governmental programs to support innovation in various ways, but also trying to understand the regulatory context that has shaped offsite methods and construction writ large in these places. The medium level, which again, very creatively, I called the eye level, was spending time visiting the actual companies pursuing these methods in each place. So trying to understand their business models, how they have gotten investment or financed their offsite production, how they have evolved over time, because many of these companies have existed for decades or more, some of them centuries. And so understanding that and seeing how that maps onto some of our companies in the cohort. And then lastly, on the ground level, getting really tactical, like literally visiting and doing tours of the factories themselves, understanding why they laid the factory out and done the assembly line in the way that they did. And that directly translates across factories in the US as well, plus the literal machines and the nuts and bolts, some of which were different than how we use in the US for various reasons that don't translate. But there are quite a few things that our cohort members learned and noticed during these tours that are like pure engineering and do translate pretty well. So I think that's about the minimum amount of context to follow this conversation and get into a little more depth than we otherwise would have. So with all of that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Michelle, who is going to have a great, fun conversation with our dashing young panelists. Michelle, it's to you.
Tyler. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. I'm Michelle Boyd. I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at Terner Labs, where I generally oversee our programming, both all of our venture work and some of our data tool development work. And it's great to be here with everybody. I'm going to pass it off to our panel one by one to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll jump into questions. Yurker, I'll let you go first as our non-resident entrepreneur.
Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. I'm actually calling in from Sweden, so it's early evening here. My name is Jerker Lessing. I have been working with industrialized construction for the last 25 years, and the last 12 years, not only in Sweden but also in California, because I have a collaboration with the Stanford University, where I teach a course on industrialized construction, and we also organize a conference every year. And also, since a couple of years back, I do also some consulting and advising to organizations and companies in California and actually also globally. I spent not the last 8 years, but until 2 years ago, I spent 8 years with a company called BoKlok, and I was head of research and development. BoKlok is a very mature and advanced company in using the practices of industrialized construction, built around 15,000 homes in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the UK. And before that, I also did academic research on this topic at Lund University, and then later, as I said, at Stanford University. So I have spent some time thinking of working with and collaborating within the space of industrialized construction.
Thanks, Yerker. I want to pass it over to Apoorva.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Apoorva Pasricha, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Cloud Apartments, which is one of the 6 companies that is a part of the Builders Lab through the Terner Labs. My background has been in the real estate space through a lot of different adjacent angles. So I have built my career around how technology and innovation can be used to make the built environment better, and have spent time on the finance side at JP Morgan, on the public sector side with the city of San Jose and state of Massachusetts, on the development side with Sidewalk Labs, which is Google's urban development arm, and then on the manufacturing side, less through housing, but more on the automotive side with a company called Zoox, which is Amazon's self-driving car company. But a lot of parallels between modular and offsite construction, and my background around highly regulated markets, around manufacturing principles taken from one sector to the other, and a lot of interaction between the public and private sector. So that's what my background has been. Cloud Apartments as a company is an early stage company that is a modular development platform, and we want to transform how housing is built fundamentally in this country. And we reduce the cost of housing specifically through volumetric modular, through a patented system that we have. It's an MEP assembly system that we have, and our standardized apartments. And we partner with factories and general contractors to actually deliver it. So we ourselves are not a factory, but we partner with all of the players in the housing ecosystem to do the work that we do.
Great, thank you. And for those newer to the modular space, in the US context, we talk about volumetric modular being boxes, panelized being like a wall set that includes anything from just wood to including the utilities within it, or MEP. And so you'll probably hear those terms thrown around here. Last to you, Nathan.
Hi, thank you. I'm Nathan Young, CEO of Mods PDX. We started doing modular volumetric construction in 2008, and we've been focused on better ways to build, both from a sustainability standpoint, and now in the last couple of years, we've been heavily focused on the introduction of mass timber, or specifically mass plywood panels that are made in Oregon, and how we can incorporate our designs to better facilitate our construction process and try to lower costs. Our goals are particularly stemmed around trying to figure out rural housing needs for Oregon and the surrounding areas where we typically have a significant decrease in middle housing. Been in the construction space since '91, so been at it for a long time. Have 2 different companies. One's a site-built company, Nathan D. Young Construction Inc., and then the modular company that we started in 2008. And we're just focused on better ways to try to build.
Thanks, Nathan. So as you can see, we have a diversity of perspectives here within this small group, and excited to hear what you guys have to say. So the first question I want to pose primarily to Nathan and Apoorva is, what assumptions or expectations did you have before the trip, and how are they confirmed or challenged? Nathan, if you want to go first.
Sure. Yeah, heading into the trip, I mean, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. We've had our own factory for 15 years. We were excited to see what I envisioned to be super automated type of facilities, and I was pleasantly surprised with a little bit of both. We saw factories that were extremely automated, and then we saw factories that resembled exactly what we've been doing for a long period of time. So the diversity across different platforms, and then the understanding that some factories that were fully automated had to make that decision to standardize completely their product and their line, because they didn't have the ability to have very many changes to what the end design would be, versus some other factories that we saw that had a little more flexibility in their ability to design and build and fabricate both volumetric and panelized. So I think it was exciting to see the diversity across all the different areas. Scotland, I was super excited to tour best. That's been one of my biggest takeaways, was just the collaboration that we saw between both academic, government, and for-profit companies coming together to try to figure out how to develop and facilitate innovative processes within the construction market in a way that allowed everybody to be able to take advantage of it. And I think that that's something that we desperately need in the US, is the ability to be able to try and test new ideas and concepts, then also work on workforce development and training to be able to get people up to speed on the new innovative processes that we're trying to do, And to Tyler's point, I mean, we're only somewhere between 7 to 15% of the marketplace. So we need to train people on how to understand offsite construction, how to navigate the logistics of it from the transportation side to the installation to the fabrication and the design side. So there's a lot of industry education that we still need to go through.
Yeah, something that really struck me was that they had one of the primary roles the government had taken in Sweden was investing in like the academic and research realm, and that they measured their success by like how many people who'd worked on that research were now working in industry. Like it was a core part of what they were trying to do. What about you, Apoorva?
I think it's a good segue into kind of what my expectation was. Knowing what I know about Europe and just European countries, I expected that the government would have been the entity that was leading the innovation, that was leading the incentives to push the innovation forward, whether it was through like regulatory, whether it was through the regulatory side. And I think we did see elements of that. So part of that assumption about the fact that a lot of European nations are social stations, and so the government invests in issues like housing. Part of that was confirmed through, in Sweden, we saw the codes as an example, that in the 1990s, Sweden moved from prescriptive to performance-based building codes. So that was an example of how it was confirmed. But what surprised me on the other side was how much the private sector had also been involved in the process along the way. I think that the assumption going in that government can solve this at scale was a little bit refuted with examples of how much investment private companies have put into things like sustainability, into new building materials, and even being a part of the coalitions that we saw in Sweden and in Scotland. And a very specific example, for instance, I think we saw LFM30, which was one of the coalitions in Sweden that was between the city and industry. And one thing that really surprised me there was that they were able to bring developers on board to sign up to the cost and the sustainability related performance metrics that they had to create more carbon neutral buildings. And so that involvement from the private side surprised me, knowing what I went into with the assumption that I had about the roles that each sector would play.
Yeah, I remember asking, they were in like a downturn in Sweden, and I remember asking like, oh, is the government going to play any role in helping to try and like save or bridge these companies in the downturn? And they were like, no, we don't do that. Like we don't interfere with the corporate business in that way, which similarly was really, really challenging. Jörg, any reflections or reactions to Nathan and Apoorva?
No, well, first of all, maybe I forgot to say I had the role in on the trip as part
Jörg was our tour guide. We should in the
sorry, yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. So I helped organize the Swedish part of the tour, setting up the visits and so on. No, but I think what I wanted to show was exactly what Nathan and Apoorva touched on. I wanted to show that how deeply rooted sustainability is in the sector, especially in the industrialized construction sector, because that's part of the sort of edge that the industrialized construction companies bring to the market and to the table. And I think that was pretty obvious. We saw that. I think almost all companies that we met talked about sustainability first, almost more than efficiency and cost and so on, because in a way we have covered that. We have proven that that is the case. But now the next step is to really show that, look, it's also efficient in terms of lowering carbon and all that. But then I also wanted to show the variety of the different industrialized construction practices. It's not only modular, it's not only panelized, it's not only mass timber, but there is actually room for all of the above. And that's exactly what I wanted to show. And that's why we visited both super advanced companies and then also the less advanced and the more taking one investment at a time kind of approach. To show that there's a place for all these companies on the market, especially when it has matured as it has around here. So that's some of the reflections and also expectations of the trip from my side.
Yeah, just one quick thing to add around the sustainability. The other thing I think a lot of us found interesting was that alongside pushing sustainability, right up there was rural job creation as part of the story that the industrialized construction field was telling about what they offered. And we saw that by how remote a lot of these factories are and the workforce programs. So a kind of follow on to that for Nathan or Apoorva, when you think about the trip, like what are one or two specific moments you remember thinking to yourself, like, wow, I never thought of that, or like I never thought that we could do things this way. Could have you,
Yeah.
go ahead, Nathan. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think one of my big takeaways, or a couple of them, was just the approach to sustainability is much different. They're not viewing sustainability as an individual house where we're going to try to do a sustainable home. They were looking at sustainable communities, and the town that we visited in Scotland was emanating that. I mean, and LM50 was also doing the same thing. They were really focused on larger context of how to create sustainability throughout the entire process. But I think the simple term that I took away is over there they seem to be doing much more adulting, in the sense that they're thinking long term. They're not thinking in short term segments of this quarter or next year. And we looked at these massive companies that were vertically integrated and 100+ years old, and they had a different approach to the way that they were looking at business, and understanding that they were looking at the business perspective over a much longer stretch of time, knowing that somebody before them had created this and that they needed to keep it going, and they had to make specific decisions. And when we were in Scotland at the mill, and he was talking about the truck driver that they helped facilitate to buy a truck and get a couple trucks, and then he said very clearly, even though we're not moving much material right now, we still keep him busy, and we don't try to lower his price, because we need him when the times get good just as much as we need him when the times get bad. And I think some of those contextual relationships that we miss within our society about the importance of the collaborators that we work with, or the subcontractors, or the professionals, is too oftentimes we think about us trying to gain our own profits off each individual project and not try to gain our profits off of the long-term approach. And that goes to sustainability as well. It's much easier to reach holistic sustainability throughout communities when you start from the very beginning, and you look at utility districts and you look at systems that are going to be put into the underground as a whole, instead of trying to put that mandate on each individual home after the fact. That drives the cost of trying to reach sustainability up, and really individualizes it instead of making it into a community type approach.
Apoorva.
Yeah, I would echo some of what Nathan said, but there were a couple of core things that stood out to me. I think the first one was, I often think of R&D, and I'm primed to think of R&D in US companies as an ancillary function. And somehow the way the trip was structured, I think that R&D, to what Nathan was saying a little bit, felt a little bit more like a core function in a business, which led to more strategic long-term thinking in what companies were doing. And so I think that, as a result, probably impacted also how companies thought about testing new methods of construction. And so a very specific example that comes to my mind is Jerome, was a group that we visited. And they have factories, and they spend time testing new materials or processes in their factory. And one thing that really stood out to me was that when they do pilots and when they're testing these things, their first question that they're trying to answer isn't, is it going to save on cost? It's that, is the technology going to work? Or is the new method or process going to be effective? And I think that, to me, is a signal of longer term thinking, because if you are spending time creating cost savings on one specific project, it becomes difficult. It can become difficult, at least even in the US context. What I've seen is that you are so solely focused on that as the metric, as opposed to really seeing, is this a strategic bet you're able and willing to make? And that was a very core difference, at least that I saw, that kind of surprised me. And I said, wait, pilots don't have to save on cost. They can be another measure of success on how we're testing some of the things that we're doing. And I think that was really powerful. So that was one thing that stood out. The second moment that I think that was really valuable was when we visited BEST, which was the industry collaborative where we saw, you know, their R&D facility, where we talked to them about how it got started in Scotland. And the reason why that stood out to me was because it was a visual demonstration of some of the innovation that's happening. And one thing that they said was that they often bring government stakeholders or other groups to actually show what they're doing. And I think that was really valuable from a US context, because what I find that we're missing is a market education around industrialized construction could actually be really, could be stronger. And so to have a physical space and a whole ecosystem around it where you can reliably bring a group of people to, if they're interested in learning about something, and walk away leaving inspired, I think was actually really powerful as well. So for me, those were the two things that stood out as moments of, oh, whoa, wait, this is very possible, and we could actually do this in the US ourselves as well.
Jörg, I'm going to pose to you a slightly different question, which, based on your time straddling both Sweden and the US and working in other countries outside the US, which practices or technologies or ways of thinking from Sweden, Scotland, or elsewhere do you think are most ripe for adaptation in the US?
Well, I think actually we can give it almost a little broader view, because I think it has to do with specializing. So you, as an industrialized construction company or a product-oriented company or so, I think it's super crucial that you dare to specialize and you dare to pick your niche on the market, and not least that you dare to stick to it, because that's when you get really good at it, and that's when the results will come. And then I think also it's about establishing close relationships, long-term relationships, far beyond the singular project, because that has also to do with the specializing. That's also when the results will come, and it's not only you and your company, but it's actually the whole ecosystem around you, or so your supply chain or value chain, that has to work together. So that's something I think that's easier said than done, of course, but it has something to do with the long-term commitment. And not jumping from different ideas all the time, because then it's hard to get the consistency. And then I think actually, as we almost talked a little about already, I think it's about don't overcomplicate it. Don't see housing as too complex. So dare to start small, and dare to do it with a step-by-step approach, which can be also phrased as don't over invest from the start, because then it can be difficult to hit it right. So I think some of the companies around here have used a very simple recipe, and that's about one, identifying your customer and really get to know the priorities, the cost or price limitations, where they want to live, how they want to live, how big, how small, what functions, and so on. Really, really understand the customer. Then translate that into some type of platform or a product concept or so, to really answer sort of the needs from the customers. And then as the third step, then you create your production system. Don't start with creating a super advanced production system and then try to find what kind of products to build, and then try to chase customers, because then it might be a risky route. So taking this other, start with the customer, go through the product, and then establish the production system, then you're on an interesting path that is more likely to be successful. And don't do it too complicated.
I'm curious here. I'm curious for Apoorva and Nathan. Like, when we pick companies at Turner, some of these insights, Yerker is one of our advisors, or something that we have in mind, but also the environment around you is so different in the US. I wonder if you could just reflect and respond to what Yerker said with, like, even if that's what you want to do, what might make it hard about the current US context to dare to specialize or to go slow and not invest as much upfront, and maybe how you've thought about that a bit across your business. And I'll just say this wasn't part of the prep question, so you guys can go off script a bit.
Survival. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I think a specific example of that is I'll share, with cloud specifically. When we initially launched in the market, we had a catalog of products, specifically of studios to 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments, and different lines that we were kind of working to go to developers with and say, these are standardized. We will work with factories to build them. I think feedback from the market from developers will tell you that developers do want a degree of customization when they're engaging with players. And so how do you find a way to standardize while leaving flexibility for customization is a question that we've had to answer quite a bit. And one thing that we've come around to is incentivize repetition amongst developers. So if there's a developer that does want to create a more customized version of a cloud product, that's great, and we will do that, but we will also work with them to find out how much are they going to repeat this product. So is that customization happening on a project specific basis or in a programmatic way that the developer is choosing to do it? And where they're doing it on a programmatic way, that's where our incentive to want to work with them more closely to really reinforce that customer relationship becomes stronger. But I think that what makes if we followed kind of the path of specializing and only kind of doing a version of specializing in my mind would be, just sticking to the floor plans that we have and saying, like, this is the market segment that we're operating in. I think what we've had to respond to in the market has just been feedback from the market, and that's how we've had to evolve just based on the US context.
Thanks for using your hand, Yerker. You can just jump in.
Yeah, no, but I think that this is a great example, I think, of actually responding or doing almost exactly as I said, because what you're saying, Apoorva, is that you are having a close relationship with your customer. You are listening to them, but you also ask some serious questions like, okay, what kind of customization are you really after? What do you really need? And you have that kind of discussion because you want to have a continuous relation with them. And that, I think, is a super good start of this evolution, because it could also be that, okay, from the very start, you don't have the exact right offering to your customers. So you iterate a little with this, and then you tweak a little, they tweak a little, and then you're on to a really interesting route, I think. So I think that's a great example of how you can do it.
And I want to just say, Nathan, I want to give you a chance to respond. And I'm actually say we have some amazing questions that are coming in the chat. So I want to give you a chance to respond, Nathan, and then I'm going to start weaving in some of our questions.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Apoorva said as far as survival. As we've been at this 15 years, we've adapted to kind of what the market wanted. When we first started doing modular construction in Portland, Oregon, we didn't have a lot of traction. We were actually building in California and Washington, and even in Nevada. And then some of the first projects that we did in our local area were ones that I designed and developed. And in that process, we've spent the last 15 years trying to understand how we can create standardization without letting the client know that we have standardization. So we focus on two elements of it. One of it being the micro standardization, which is the processes at which we build and the way that we assemble products, but it doesn't deter us away from a macro outcome or a macro process so that we can create different typologies, different unit configurations, different finishes. But a lot of our mechanical, electrical, plumbing, our structural elements, the way that we go about designing our module volumetric boxes tends to be very standardized. And even across different platforms and different typologies, we've come up with systems approaches by using the same architects over and over again, and the same structural and the same mechanical and electrical design elements to be able to bring things together. So kind of to what Jurka's saying, it's about having a team. You have to have a team and collaborate. And again, that's not something that's typically indicative in the US of the construction market, is to really focus on a team type approach. In fact, construction has spent a lot of time going out and having an architect design a building. You have the professionals do all the professional drawings, and then you go to a contractor and ask them how much it's going to cost. And that's a backwards paradigm to what we need to do in industrialized construction or design for manufacturing, or any one of the number of terms that we've come up with in the US to try to justify working together, which is really what it boils down to, is we have to work together from the beginning to understand what the consumer needs, what the local geographical area needs, and then how we need to go about building that process.
So one of the questions in the chat that I think kind of builds on this, both because we've talked a lot about the relationship between, trying to sell to a developer in the US and kind of that team approach, is kind of taking it back to the different regulatory and government environments. So if we could, I'd say maybe the question is, do the US state and local governments erect barriers to delivering modular housing in communities? And how have Scotland or Sweden paved the way for more communities to benefit from this type of housing? So maybe if you could talk a little bit about the kind of what in the regulatory environment maybe works against some of the business practices you would like to do, or ability to sell your product, and what is different in that Swedish and Scottish context. Maybe I'll go to you first, Apoorva, and then go back around.
Yeah. I think I would say that there are barriers to erect housing in general, regulatory barriers to erect housing in general. So I think modular is just one element that is that sees that barrier just in a different way. But I think all 118 attendees on this call can probably agree that there are barriers to regulatory barriers to erecting housing. I think where there's an opportunity on the modular side is, if you believe modular is faster, if you believe modular is more streamlined, then that should be reflected in the regulatory processes that are used to evaluate modular as a method of constructing. So assuming modular is being used as a method for a site, like having that site be faster or be permitted faster, or things like that, I think are really could be valuable tools as a way to incentivize it and to remove the barrier. So I think like those are the types of things that come to my mind when I think about what are the barriers that exist in the adoption of modular in the US context. I would say I think, Michelle, the second part of your question was like, what did we learn from the Swedish side that we could adopt here? I think that I feel like that apples to apples comparison feels a little bit challenging to me, just because the regulatory context is just so different, right? Like, I think if, for instance, we had performance-based codes as opposed to prescriptive codes, that in itself would have such a huge impact on the adoption of modular, would be my thesis. So I think the example that I gave just feels very, as a result, just feels too tactical. So I would say that my comparison might not be apples to apples as a result.
Yeah, and for the audience who may not understand this, like performance-based code is saying that like this is how strong your wall has to be, and that's how it exists in a lot of in Europe. In the US, instead of saying how strong your wall has to be, you have to say you have to use this type of wood, and your nails need to be this far apart, and that we know that will make a strong wall. And so it inhibits innovation. We even had moments on the trip. I remember one in particular where people were going around being like, what is this staple? I've never seen it before. And it was this like particularly long staple that is very commonly used instead of nails, because it's like faster and more efficient and cheaper to do, that just like isn't allowed in the code environment in the US. But they've been able to find it and innovate and now use it based on this different code environment that they have in Europe. Nathan or Jurka, do you want to respond to this one?
First, if you have something, Nathan, or
go ahead, Jurka.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I think it's all. I agree with you, Apoorva, because I think it's also hard to give like super concrete examples of how the government or so have paved the road for industrialized construction. I think one aspect is that it has been around for so long in Sweden. So in the single family homes industry, it's been around for 100 years, and for multifamily also for a very long time. I mean, at scale since the 1960s. that version, so to say, of industrialized construction, and now more contemporary since the last 25 years. So this is nothing new in our industry. So also the authorities, I mean, they are also very used to this kind of these methods and so on. So it's not that this is like a little fraction of the industry. It's actually a pretty big portion of the industry. So it is there, it's accepted, and it's sort of in a way a very common nature of how we build. But I think, as you, Michelle, mentioned, I think it was, or maybe, yeah, anyway, someone mentioned that in the 1990s, we changed our codes to function-based or performance-based codes. And that was a big thing, of course. And it was, I think, actually 1995 when Sweden joined the European Union. So I think that was a huge shift. And then I think the Swedish authorities, they have also supported the development more on a general basis in terms of supporting and financing innovation projects, R&D projects, where not only companies got some funding, but they have like to support so-called triple helix projects, where companies, meaning the industry and authorities and academia, have collaborated together, and that has been super fruitful. So I think that it's also a way of stepping back a little, not being too involved in specific projects, specific financing systems or so, but developing the whole industry as such. I think that has been the main role for authorities, at least the last 25 years.
Okay, your comment also made me think about, what is the role that government can play in innovation. And I think that there are the opportunities that I saw are, for instance, we know that developers in the US, and actually probably in other places as well, people are afraid to innovate because it could impact their bottom line. And so you have to de-risk innovation for them. De-risking innovation is something that the government can play a role in. And a specific example would be, is there government-owned land that can be used to place some of the modular or panelized systems as a way to test, because then government can help create the proof point for market to follow. And I think that's an opportunity that that would exist in removing some of the barriers that I see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point. That's a good point, because that has happened quite a lot. Not national authorities so much, but local authorities in like cities and regions and so on. So that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think when we talk about government, I know from my approach and my developments is we have government at so many different levels. So we follow our national code, then we follow a state code, and then we go to a local jurisdiction and we deal with a local planner that has the decisive nature to be able to control the outcome of our projects. And so when we're thinking about government, it's multi-tiered. It's not just a single entity that we can help navigate this situation. It's one that has to be educated from the ground up sometimes in each individual area that you're going to work in. So, I mean, we have a large project out in a small town right now in Eastern Oregon, and we're having to educate them about their own laws with regards to land use that have nothing to do with the modular construction aspect. But you get into these areas, it stalls development, and then the developer uses the fact that we're using an innovative process as a means to justify why he's not necessarily excited about the project. And so it's understanding the context of government is at every level that we really need to focus on and start to work on education about how these processes need to work, and then remove some of the barriers to individual planning and zoning agencies having the ability to be able to control our outcomes so that we can standardize at a much higher level, because we can't standardize across multi-states right now. We standardize for Oregon. We have a different approach for Title 24 in California. We have a different set of energy codes in Washington. So the states that are directly around us, we have to build a different product for based upon which state we're going into. And then you get into each individual local jurisdiction and you have to meet all of their individual requirements. So it can be very difficult to create a standardized product.
Yeah, and I want to, knowing that I want to this is great. And if anyone on here is really interested in diving more into codes, this is an area that we've been focusing a lot on recently within Terner Labs and plan to be doing and are currently conducting some research on about what different policy frameworks could be for code implementation here in the US, because it's something that we definitely saw so starkly different within Sweden and is such a challenge to the scale for a lot of the companies that we work with. I want to focus back in a little bit on the company culture and other cultural differences. So it sounds like there's some interest in learning a bit more from the audience about the R&D culture. I know this is something that you're great leading an R&D team over a large company, something we've talked about a bit within our cohort. So can you talk a little bit about how R&D can be embedded into a company's culture as a strategic priority rather than being seen as something that's nice to have?
Yeah, absolutely. How much time do we have? No.
You have 2 minutes here, because that's it.
We add a couple of hours here because this is no, I'm just kidding. No, but I think it is deeply rooted in, and I would say especially in industrialized construction companies, it's deeply rooted to engage in innovation and R&D projects. And I think that has actually to do with the nature of the business, that it is specialized and it has a continuous improvement approach. And therefore the need and the benefits are pretty obvious for companies that, okay, if we do improvements and we do R&D, we do research, then we will benefit from it. So I think that's a really good match between these type of companies and acting within and participating in research. And as I said, it has been common for the authorities to launch different development or innovation programs where it's expected for the companies not only to participate or ask for a grant or so, but it's actually often a demand that it has to be done together. So not only one company, sometimes we have programs with like 5 or even 10 or even sometimes more companies collaborating on a certain topic. And it can be, when I was with Bookloop, for example, we were participating in several different R&D projects where almost all of our competitors were also participating. But we sort of, I think all of us, we dared to open up because we knew that, first of all, the battle was not between us. It was between the group of us and the rest of the industry. So the more we could open up, the more we collaborated, the more we innovated together, the more we gained as a sort of sub-industry. Of course, we didn't open up about our business strategies and what customers we were chasing, but the way we were covering our modules, or the way we were assembling modules, or the way we were doing these specific things to make the process better and faster and more reliable, that was something we would gain from all of us. So those are some examples. So I think it has to do with sort of an openness. And we are also asked to be open, and we are asked to collaborate. Otherwise, we don't get the grants and the funding. And I think, as I mentioned, the triple helix, that it's not only companies, that it's also very common or typical to that the academic institutions like universities or research groups are also participating in this, and they are infusing and bringing methods and models and sort of frameworks to the table, and they get case studies, of course, back, but the companies get the knowledge infused, and also they get to sort of take one step back and seeing the broader picture. And I think this collaboration, especially between academia and industry, has been super fruitful and very successful for many companies the last, for a long time. So that's been sort of a culture around here. So the openness, the collaboration, and the continuity, I think, are the key words of how it works.
Oh, Michelle, go for it.
I just say if you, we have one more. I have one more question I want to get to. So if you can give a quick answer, Apoorva, and then we can transition to one last one.
Jurka, the other thing that I saw, and I'm curious, so your reaction was that I think R&D is tied to business outcomes, and business outcome in Sweden, as an example, sustainability was a part of the business outcome. And so when you are testing the new means and methods, and you can directly tie it to business outcome as defined not just by cost, not just by profit, but by other goals, I think that was really valuable as well. And then the other thing that came across less on this trip, but maybe on another Terner Labs visit that we did to Walters and Wolf back in October, which is a factory based out in California. Lean manufacturing principles were implemented across the factory. And to me, they were an indicator of a desire to do process improvement, which is effectively innovation. And so even the folks on the floor, factory floor, were incentivized to submit ideas or do things that demonstrated a way to make the process in the factory better. And so I think R&D, not just being a center that sits in an organization, but is actually percolated across all levels of the organization, has been kind of the other tactic that I've seen to integrate more successfully into the core.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right that it is. We can see it everywhere, and it's ranging from the strategic down to very tactical and operational improvements. So going from improvements to development to research, these three levels, I think, are evident everywhere.
The last topic, which is kind of two topics, so choose your adventure for those of you on our panel here, is one person asking about how the relationship between developers and industrialized construction companies is different across the different markets we're talking about. And then the other is asking about capital, like anything about the capital or investment market that is different across the two. So you can kind of choose your adventure about which of those you want to dive into.
I can jump on the collaboration, developers and industrialized construction companies. I think actually the most successful industrialized construction companies either act as the developer themselves, or they have a close, and then I mean a really close collaboration with their developers, so that they can really tweak and work together, not only in one project, but on a program or so. So there is definitely a strong tie there, or connection, and we see that the more so to say a vertical integration, but it doesn't have to be the same company, but as close collaboration it gets, the more successful and the more benefits out of the concept you get. So that has been very, very clear to me over the years, that okay, that's how it works.
I can speak to the capital side. One thing that I observed on the capital front, in just chatting with the folks who were also leading and hosting us, was that capital understands industrialized construction in these countries in a way capital does not in the US. And that indicated to me just more of a market education gap. And what it demonstrated to me was, what specifically came up was, like, when you're raising debt for a project, when you go talk to the bank, does the bank understand that how do factory payments work? Does the bank understand how the flow of money is on this project? And there was more familiarity that existed in Sweden across the capital stack for industrialized construction methods. And I think that came from just market education that has gone in over the years, and just because the industry is more mature in a way that doesn't exist in the US as much. Because here we're often kind of trying to figure out, who is going to be the capital source that we can turn to? And oftentimes it's local banks who might already know the developer, so they're willing to lend capital, as opposed to the larger banks, for instance. And so that was the other distinction I observed.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that, I mean, as I said earlier, in order for us to get a presence in the Portland, Oregon market, we had to do our own development. And so I had to put up my own capital and do my own projects to really put a footprint into the market and show people what could be done with modular construction. I think the capital issue that we saw over there was much different because these companies were so vertically integrated. They had capital coming in from all sorts of different sectors. So one of the big issues that we run into in the US is we get these large companies that explode out of nowhere and then take a lot of capital and go bankrupt, and it creates a really bad flavor in everybody's mouth in the capital markets for industrialized construction, because these companies oftentimes haven't walked before they started to run, and they didn't understand some of the principles. Or back to what Jirka was saying, they didn't understand what the market needed, and they knew that there was a holy grail hidden within the offsite construction process, but they didn't really take the time to develop the processes around that to make it successful. And so those failures end up leading to issues for the rest of us that are more on a pace of trying to grow somewhat organically and then getting to a point where we need capital to really get to the next level, because we have gone through our processes to where now people are like, well, if you're not building 1,000 units, why would we want to invest in you if you're only going to build 300? Well, the goal is to get to 300 efficiently and then get to 600 and then get to 1,200. But even the factories that we saw over there, they were adjusting their flow rate based upon what the market does. And with housing right now, interest rates are up, housing supply is still not where it needs to be. But the problem is people can't afford housing, so I can't go build housing because people aren't buying housing. And so my factory isn't running at its full capacity right now. And so we oftentimes talk about capacity in Oregon, and they want us to be building 50,000 units a year. But the problem is we don't have 50,000 consumers that can afford the housing right now for us to go out and go through those processes. And larger developers are holding back on pulling the trigger on projects because capital is too expensive right now. And so there's a lot of variables that we come into when we're trying to think about moving this forward. The biggest takeaway I had over and over again was the massive vertical integration. And to Jirka's point, I mean, a lot of times these modular manufacturing companies had other arms of industry all the way into logging and then all the way into their own development arms and real estate that were selling, acquiring lots. Many of the companies had 10,000 plus units or lots. I'm not sure exactly how they defined it, but they had a lot of buildable land over the next 10 years that they could look at doing to keep their factory in production, keep their employees busy, and keep things moving forward. So it's just that there's a lot of differences that exist, but I think what we took away on our company side was the vertical integration.
Yeah, and thank you, Nathan. With that, we are at time. There's so much more we could dive into here. And if you asked a question we didn't talk out live, Tyler has been very diligently answering them within the chat. We can follow up with some of these, and we'll share the recording. And stay tuned. We've got more work and research coming out of the Terner Center and Terner Labs following up on this trip through both webinars and publications and from there. So thanks for joining, everybody, and hope you have a good rest of your day. And thank you, Apoorva, Nathan, and Jirka for sharing your insights here.